So good morning, or actually afternoon, I guess as the case may be. So as Katie said, I am Tyson Beatty. I'm the Microsoft Practice Director here at Cortec, and happy to be with you today. And we're going to go through the webinar of how to enable productivity without sacrificing security. It's a topic that's gotten a lot of attention, especially over the past couple of years here as the kind of work environment, if you will, has changed. So we're going to talk about a few things today. We'll go through a quick high-level agenda here. First and foremost, for anybody who's not overly familiar with Endpoint Manager, we're going to talk through that. And it basically serves to really push three key goals as it kind of pertains to the work landscape today, I should say. First of all, like I said, we'll do a quick introduction. Then we're going to talk about how to discover and protect those endpoints, how you can secure your identities, which is the second most important part of all those, and then how we can deliver and protect the applications that your users need on those devices. So like I said, we'll start out with a quick introduction of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Some of you may or may not know it. Microsoft actually recently renamed it. Endpoint Manager was formerly the two products of Intune and Microsoft Configuration Manager. They have merged those two together, and together as a suite, they are now what Microsoft calls the Microsoft Endpoint Manager. And it actually provides a full, very robust look at your endpoints and protection. As I said, it does combine Intune and Configuration Manager, and it provides what Microsoft calls that modern management of endpoints. You'll hear that term a lot, modern management or modern workplace. And it's all built around this idea of zero trust. And zero trust is a newer kind of term in technology. It's been around the security world for a long time, but Microsoft has really started to kind of take that approach with a lot of things. And what it largely is that idea of everybody hears it as it's assumed breach, right? And that's not exactly what zero trust is. You know, in prior days of IT, we assumed that machines were safe, right? We controlled the machine, we controlled the asset, we controlled the applications that were on it. And then a couple of years ago, this thing came along that I'm sure some of you have heard about called COVID. And regardless of your take on COVID, nobody can argue the fact that it severely changed the work environments we have today. We went from having everybody in offices and in very controlled environments from a technology estate perspective to very delineated environments and very scattered environments. We have people working from home, from remote offices, hybrid. It's kind of changed that whole concept. And so this whole concept or mantra of assume breach kind of took hold. Zero trust is really less about assume breach and really more about control. If somebody does get in, or if we do have a bad actor, it's more about being able to control their access, limit their movements, and protect the device and the identity as best we can. And that's a lot of what Microsoft Endpoint Manager, and more specifically Intune, under that suite is targeted towards doing. And you can see here, it does a lot of that while reducing your TCO, or total cost of ownership. So number one, unified management. And we'll talk through each of these here in a couple of minutes, but unified management really drives that idea of we have one pane, one platform, one ability to control and or modify, patch, push all of our devices out there, regardless of what type of device or how they were acquired. Number two, built-in protections. Again, it's that idea of that zero trust security. And we'll talk a lot more about this in a slide later, but it's that idea of, if you think back a couple of years, we trusted that your phone was protected, that you had encryption or maybe some sort of antivirus. We assumed your laptop was secure because we gave it to you. Not necessarily the case anymore. And then comprehensive scalability. Again, it goes back to that idea of the workforce has scattered. We're not necessarily all in individual offices anymore, or even in corporate offices. So we have to be able to scale and scale quickly. In prior days of IT, this meant adding servers, adding lines, adding network, adding power, whatever the case may be. Now we have that ability to be very scalable at a very quick rate without having a lot of overhead or infrastructure. So if we break these down, like I said, first and foremost, the first one we talk about is unified management. Four kind of key points here. We extend the benefits of cloud management, provide business continuity for remote and hybrid workers, protect devices for all workers, and we can manage both virtual and physical assets. The beauty of this is, like we talked about, the workscape has changed. One of the things that's become very common is Windows 365, Microsoft's newest offering for the cloud PC idea, and AVD as well. So that VDI type of concept. The beauty of a solution like the modern endpoint management is we have the same controls. So now whether you're looking at your phone, whether I pick up my note here and I use my phone, or I use my laptop that was provided by Cortec, or if I use my cloud PC from my home PC, I can protect all of those in one similar, not necessarily just pane of glass, but one simple control panel. So I can apply the same types of protections. It does all of this while providing that business continuity, right? So the problem with some of your older MDM type of solutions, if any of you are familiar with an AirWatch or a MOS 360, they're locally based. So they all require hardware on-prem that's connected to Exchange, whatever the case may be, whatever your mail system may be. They also don't have the protection outside of email. This opens the doors to all of that. It's no longer just about protecting your email. So along those lines, we talk about built-in protection, right? We don't talk about protecting your email anymore. It has become largely about protecting your company data. You know, I gave the example of my phone. From this phone, I can turn around and jump onto OneDrive and have access to my OneDrive data, all what may be or may not be sensitive data. So being able to control and protect that data from egress or leak becomes a huge need, not just on a laptop, but in mobile devices. Ensure device and app compliance, pretty self-explanatory, right? We want to be able to ensure that the laptop you're using, whether we provided it or whether you bought it on your own, that whole BYOD, or bring your own device, we'll reference numerous times. You know, that starts to expand and open up. And we want to make sure that even though it's your device, we're protecting our company data. Prevent and detect security breaches. We talked a little bit around that one with that zero trust, right? That's that idea of I want to make sure that we're protecting you, not just the device and not just my data. We want to protect your identity as well. And then proactively remediate vulnerabilities. Like I said, kind of that idea within zero trust of it's not just about assume breach. It's not even just about assuming that you will be breached. It's about containing it. So if there is a security incident, how do we very quickly identify it? How do we stop it? And how do we prevent them from moving on? These become much, much bigger tasks and much, much easier controlled within the Intune suite. And one of the slides later, we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And then, of course, the third one I mentioned was comprehensive security, or scalability, I'm sorry, comprehensive scalability. Deployed with zero touch. This is a big one, right? So we're used to the days where, you know, a user may have had to send a phone in, or maybe we have to deploy the laptop. It has to come into what we call like a depot mode, so that somebody is actually doing the application installs, they're doing the patching, they're deploying an image, all of the things we're used to within a normal deployment type of scenario. Now we can literally move towards the idea of deploying with a zero touch or very, very minimal user interaction. So from a phone perspective, they may have to download the company portal. But on a laptop, we can use things like autopilot or auto enrollment to actually deploy without ever even having to touch the machine. And that can be huge, again, as users are scattered. I can't necessarily, I should say, call down to, you know, Joe and Jane and say, hey, your laptops are ready. Can you guys come up and pick them up? Because Joe may be in Florida and Jane may be in Michigan. So being able to deploy with that zero touch and scale out to that speaks to that same simplify and speed up deployments. Obviously, if I can do it remote or if I can do it with zero touch, I can do it much, much faster. This also applies to things like app dev, so app deployments. If I need to push out a new version of the Concur application, because you use it for travel expenses, I can patch and push that application much simpler and without having to give kind of the old school go to this network share, right? I think most of us will remember a day somewhere where somebody came to your desk and they logged in from their IT console and they went into some admin share somewhere and they loaded the newest version of Office because you needed it. Now we can do that. I can do that from my desk. We can do it from anywhere. Manage digital estate health. This is kind of a term that's, I don't want to say newer, but a lot of people have not heard as much. And that idea of digital estate is for a long time, especially on phones, we worried about email. It was all about email, right? We don't want people getting your email. We don't want you losing your email. That has become so much bigger, especially as Microsoft 365 has kind of expanded and grown. Your digital estate health is so much more these days. It can be things like your email. It can also be your OneDrive data, your OneNote data, your Teams conversations, all the way down to your actual identity and securing that. Because if I can get a hold of your identity, the rest will follow. So being able to truly manage and secure that full digital estate becomes key. And then, of course, automate updates. Patching has been a problem for a long time, right? So how do we keep people connected? How do we keep patches pushed out? In the days of SCCM or Configuration Manager, it does a terrific job of that, but you have to be connected. The machine has to be able to phone home. It has to be able to connect to the corporate network. And as we've said, and you'll notice there's a theme here, people are not connected anymore, right? People aren't sitting in that office. So we have, I have several hospital medical type environments where they have machines that have not connected to the network in months at a time. So those machines aren't being patched. This allows us to push that from an internet connection. No more having to deploy patches out to numerous distribution points, maintaining all of that, ensuring they're all connected. Why not let Microsoft do what they're good at? Now, third-party apps do become an update challenge, we'll put it that way. There are solutions for that. And one thing I should mention with this as we walk through this is one small part, this webinar today, of a very large workshop that we do together. And I do a lot of these. And as that full workshop, we will talk about things like how do we update programs that are not necessarily Microsoft owned. So just bear in mind, like I said, this is typically a much longer type of workshop, but I will at least want to hit on the key points and show the value of this and why you should be considering it. Our second point, we talked about how to discover and protect your endpoints by enforcing policies and deploying security tools. With any type of control system, whether it's Intune, whether it's the old days of MOS 360, AirWatch, it doesn't really matter. Most of us are used to that. We have to get that device enrolled, right? Somebody needs to go install a piece of software. It usually has to be an IT admin. They have to have admin on the box. There's a lot of hoops to jump through. We simplified a lot of that. Endpoint management today, especially from the Intune arena, is so much easier to deploy. It's about as close to zero touch as you can get. And in fact, on a laptop or a desktop, a Windows 10 machine, it can actually be zero touch. But the first and most common question I get is, Intune sounds great, but how do I get it? What do I have to do to have it? And I'm sure a few of you have seen, because it got posted out there a lot, I did a quick 2-minute talk on licensing within Microsoft 365. And that's one of the questions I get. How do we know what's included with what? And that was why I did that. Intune, I'm going to make it really, really easy. There's about 6 ways to get Intune, and here they are. If you have Office 365, you need the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite. If you're on the newer licensing and you have Microsoft 365, E3 or E5, or the F1 or F3, you're good. You already have it included. I have a lot of people today I still run across that actually have Intune today. They have the Microsoft 365 E3, but they're not leveraging it. They're not controlling and protecting those endpoints, even though they have the ability at their fingertips. So if you have any of these licenses, and again, to reiterate, if you have the Office 365 licenses, you need the Enterprise Mobility and Security, which is commonly referred to as EMS. Or if you have the Microsoft 365, you should be all set. Again, if you'd like a little bit more information around the differences between those two, you can find my quick talk out on LinkedIn and on our website. So if you have any of these, you're good to go with Intune, and we should at least be talking about how you can leverage it. And for most people, even if you are leveraging it, it's how you can leverage it further. How do you get the most out of your protection? And how do you get the most out of controlling your endpoints? As we've talked about, this kind of goes back to what I said earlier. It's a complex device landscape today. Most of us that have been in IT for more than a few years remember that if we take, and I turn on my laser pointer here, if we take a look at this up here, this company managed section to the left, this is largely where everything existed, right? That's where all of our devices sat. That's where our phones were. They were provided by the company. They were paid for. Our laptops, our desktops, whatever the case may be, they were provided by the company. So we managed everything provided by the company. Over the past few years, we've started to see much more movement in this employee managed concept, right? The idea of BYOD, bringing your own device. Phones are a beautiful example of this today because I have my phone, you have your phone. Candy, I know you have your phone. And I don't care about your family pictures, right? I don't want to control those. I don't want to wipe those. I don't want to mess with your local high score in Tetris. But what I do care about is our company data, right? I care about the corporate data in the event that you lose your phone, forget your phone is stolen. And we've even started to see an uptick in this third-party managed idea. It's the idea of your public kiosks, your contractors. These are devices that may have access to our data or my company data that I have zero control over. And in fact, somebody else may actually have control over that device. So this could be your contractor that you brought in to sub some work for a specific project. They may have a device that's protected by their company, but you still want to protect yours. And that used to be a massive issue because with any MDM out there, and I should clarify, we talk about MDM, which is mobile device management. It's all or nothing, and it's all for one. You can only ever have one authority that controls that device. So things like third-party managed become very difficult. So if we say, okay, as Cortec, for instance, we will not allow you to access our data unless you're on a managed device. But if you're working for a contractor helping us out and you have a prior managed device, we won't allow you to get to your data, but you still need to get to your email for us on your phone. That's where the idea of what's known as MAM, or Microsoft Application Management, or Mobile Application Management, has started to come into play. And you can see below, it's kind of where that split has started to happen, right? So we go from the idea of controlling your entire device to controlling the applications and controlling specific applications on your device. The idea being I can break that mold, right? So if we talk about the phones again for a quick second, I can use something like an application management on your phone to be able to say, I'm going to protect your email, and I'm going to protect your OneDrive so that if something happens, I can reclaim that data and I can assure that it's not going to be lost. But for a laptop, much like we do here at Cortec, for my laptop, I control that with a full mobile device management, meaning I can control it, I can configure it, and I can secure it. And we'll talk more about that on another slide as well, because it has really changed the landscape of what those four quadrants look like. So like I said, you can see here kind of the difference at a high level between device and app management. And the name kind of says it all, right? So a mobile device management means I control the entire device. Gives me the ability to do things like provision settings, certificates, profiles. I can report on compliance. I can remove corporate data, but I can also push applications. I can physically control patching to a machine. Whereas Intune app management, I gain a lot of the same abilities, but I gain them at an application level. I can no longer do anything with your device. I can't patch your device. I can't require it to be compliant. I can require it to be compliant to access my application, but not in general. So there is a bit of a difference there. Today's world has largely broken into two pieces. Intune application management is largely used on your true mobile devices, phones, tablets, things like that. Mobile device management is still largely leveraged for your heavier assets, such as your laptops, desktops. So that's kind of where we see the break today. As you see on the bottom of this, one of the other things we're going to talk about is these also both open up to this idea of conditional access. Conditional access is taking a step back and actually putting far more restriction and a more linear and granular level of restriction around what we can and can't control as far as access. We'll circle back to those later, but don't forget that term, because I promise you conditional access will be on the quiz at the end. I'm just kidding, there's no quiz at the end. All right, so what platforms do we support? Obviously, from the Apple standpoint, we've got your iOS's covered, the new iPad iOS, and then of course the Mac OS. Android phone, we can, anything 5.0 and up we can cover, which is most of your Androids. If you have an Android that's running anything older than Android 5.0, we probably should really talk about your phone strategy. And then of course, Microsoft. With Microsoft, we're going to cover pretty much anything Windows 10. One thing to note here, the slide is correct and the information is correct. However, Windows 10 Home, Windows 10 S, and Windows 10 IoT, they are absolutely controllable and they can be managed by Intune, but they are more limited. So just be aware that not all of these are the same level of protection, or more importantly, the same level of configuration. Windows 10 Home, for instance, we can't do things like push Wi-Fi profiles out. I can't push certificates out as easily. Pro, Education, Enterprise, you can do all of it. So it really is kind of dependent on what you're looking to do. Though in an enterprise environment, I'd really like to hope we're not going to run across Windows 10 Home very often. So what can we do with these? We've kind of wrapped all this into a bundle, right? And what's the point here? The purpose around this one is that complete device lifecycle management. And we talked about enrollment. We want this to be as simple as possible for users, get as close to zero touch as we can. On a laptop, we can virtually get there. On a phone, you have to download an application and log in. That is about it. And it'll do the rest in the background for you. So you'll notice as we work our way around this, there's a gray part of the arrow and then a blue part of the arrow. And the gray part of the arrow kind of stands for the user involvement. Blue is IT involvement. And most of us are familiar with days where once you were enrolled, you had to go download an application, right? Maybe you had to go download your mail app. You had to go download your word processor, Word, Excel, whatever the case may be. You had to, you being the end user. Now we modify that. You can see we move this over into that blue area of the line. Once you're enrolled, I can actually deploy those applications to you. We have a company Wi-Fi that we use for everybody. I can push that Wi-Fi profile out to you. I can push an always-on VPN out to you. I can configure things like if you're familiar with a GPO in an on-premise Active Directory environment, we can push those types of settings out to your machine. So far more control at the IT level. I don't have to depend on my users to do it, as well as device restriction policies and device feature settings. A lot of these are things like we talked about, the ability to turn on BitLocker, the ability to configure what a plugged-in thumb drive can and can't do, what encryption levels are required, things like that. And again, outside of the user's control. We also can protect that device. We can say things like, if you have a jailbroke device, if you have a rooted device, if you have a compromised device, we're not going to let you access our network assets. We're not going to let you access your data in Microsoft 365. We can protect corporate data by restricting actions. This is a huge, huge one within Intune. And this actually works within Intune, Conditional Access, and then a couple of other features within your tenant. But what it gives us the ability to restrict data egress. So the ability to copy, paste, save outside. At some point in our career, I'm sure all of us have seen an email come out about maybe an acquisition or a divestiture or a new project, something that really shouldn't be shared, right? It wasn't necessarily, earth-shatteringly confidential, but it was business confidential. We now have the ability to tag and mark things and physically prevent that data from being removed. I talked to an insurance company recently, and through a bunch of these type of solutions, we helped them get to a point where the only way you could extract the data from one of their machines was literally to take your camera and take a picture of it. That's the only way you were getting that data off that laptop. And at that point, we have motive and means, and it was a malicious act. So it prevents things like accidental leakage. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to protect the users from making a mistake, because mistakes happen. We can also report on device and app compliance. So we can report on maybe a laptop that didn't get the most critical patch. It didn't get Patch Tuesday's patch release. So it's susceptible to, take your pick of the latest threats, right? So we don't necessarily want to allow that device into our environment. Or maybe we just want to know why. Why did you turn off BitLocker? Maybe we don't allow you to turn off BitLocker. And then the fourth, and arguably some of the most important aspects of this that get kind of overlooked so often, is the retirement of devices, support. What happens throughout this entire lifecycle management? We do a lot on the enrollment side because that usually affects the users. Configure and protect, we've always done because we have to protect the data and we need to make sure that we're pushing whatever configurations. But that tends to be where it falls off for a lot of organizations. And the simple fact is, we still need to be able to work with those devices. What happens when it's stolen? What happens when it's lost? What processes and procedures do we have to be able to either wipe the entire device or maybe wipe the data, depending? But we need to have these in place. Revoke access to corporate resources. As unfortunate as it is, we all know that organizations have days where somebody is let go, whether that's for a legal reason, simply for downsizing, the unfortunate factors that lead to somebody being let go. When that happens, we need to immediately be able to disconnect and disable those connection points and ensure that they can't still get into any of their data. They can't delete anything, they can't take anything. From a company liability perspective, and we also don't want a user to be able to put themselves in a bad situation because of a bad decision. Perform selective wipe, retire devices. Retire devices, this is a great one. And we could literally spend an entire webinar just talking about the need and why it's important to retire devices, because nobody does it. To the point where Microsoft actually implemented device limits so that within Intune, you can only have, by default, 10 devices. And you think 10 devices is crazy, right? I can have 10 phones, I can have 10 tablets, I can have 10 laptops. What are the odds I'm ever going to get to that? You'd be surprised. I see it a lot. I could probably go back and look, and I probably have 4 phones in there. 3 of those phones have not synced over 2 years, but they never get cleaned up. Policies need to be put in place to help clean some of that up. Intune provides a lot of that reporting to be able to show outdated devices, devices that haven't synced, devices that are active but haven't synced, meaning they've checked in, they've been online, but they haven't been able to sync with Intune. Because these devices can be problematic, if you will. So that all bleeds to how we get our devices into, how we control that device lifecycle. So as we talked about, the third point we're going to talk about here is the user's identities. And we do that with multi-factor authentication and conditional access. So we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit, and we're going to move over from the device side to the user side. And most of us, I think, know what MFA is. It's funny to me because even as little as 3 or 4 years ago, the idea of putting multi-factor in place was always an argument. Nobody wanted multi-factor. It was an inconvenience. You had to enter this code in. I cannot do that to my users. Today, if you've accessed your bank online, if you've accessed anything with any kind of personal information online, you've used MFA. It's become so commonplace that it's almost funny. People kind of look at it funny when they don't get prompted for it. They're not asked for it. It's become very common in our life. The line here is correct. Multi-factor authentication prevents 99.9% of identity attacks. There is one aspect of that we will talk about that does decrease the effectiveness of this, and part of that bleeds back to what I was just saying. It's that idea of we're all so used to MFA. The ways we can use it, we'll talk about that real quick first here. I think most of us, if you've ever used it, you've ever seen it, you've had where you get the push notification that pops up on your phone. Hey, you're trying to access your account, please click approve. This is probably the most secure method because it's an actual direct push. It requires bio auth on your phone or a PIN or whatever you have to unlock your phone. However, we can also use SMS and voice. We try to move away from those because they're not the most secure. SMS is plain text over the air, right? If I have any kind of a sniffer or if I'm doing any kind of line intrusion, I can easily get that SMS. So if I have the system send you a text and I know what I'm watching for, I can get that code that we're used to getting. Soft and hard tokens are another great one. Very, very few people use these anymore. If you've ever had like the old RSA keys, I don't think I have one here handy. You're familiar with that. It's a rolling key that goes on it. But it all comes back to those 4 on the bottom. And this is that passwordless technology that Microsoft is pushing. And it is terrific technology. It's that idea of we no longer want you to have a password because the best way to make a password secure is to make it long and complex. The best way to make a password insecure is make it long and complex. Because when we make a password long and complex, people write it down. Or they start to use common terms. They become less secure in an effort to be more secure. By going with passwordless, now I'm depending on you to either click a button on your phone, maybe use Windows Hello so it registers your face. A FIDO2 key is terrific. That ties in with biometrics. So if you have an older machine that doesn't have a fingerprint reader, or maybe it doesn't have a camera strong enough to, or new enough to be able to recognize facial features, FIDO keys give you the ability to add that to any machine. And these are all far, far better because MFA The idea of multi-factor authentication is built on, it used to be called two-factor. And the idea is it's something you know and something you have. This gives you both of those in one. So if I know my password, I log in, that's something I know, and it sends information to my phone. That's something I have. So I pick up my phone and whether it's click approve, enter a code, whatever the case may be, that's something I have. Now, I told you that it prevents 99.9%, and that is accurate. And it is, last I saw the stats, that was pretty accurate. However, there has been an increase lately, and it's kind of a decrease in that number, in MFA attacks because, as I said, it's become so commonplace. And the reason for that is, and I actually did this, so working with the CIO at a company, we had gotten a hold of some account information, and we knew he had MFA set up. So while we were at lunch with him, we had somebody log into his account, click the button to generate an MFA request, and I watched this gentleman at lunch pick up his phone, look at it, log in, and click the OK button at lunch with me. He was not at his computer. He absolutely had not requested an MFA, but he was just so used to it popping up that he just approved it. So that is one area that we're starting to see more and more. There are some things like rotating codes now that require you to actually physically look at the phone. So no longer do you just click approve. You get a 2-digit or a 3-digit number. And what will happen is when you click MFA on your machine, when I log into my laptop, it will pop up a number. And then on my phone, I have to select which one of those 3 correlates with what's on my laptop. So there are ways of bringing this back to that 99.9% effectiveness. But again, it is one area people are starting to exploit because we have become so used to it. It's become almost second nature. We don't even stop to think about it. So how do we turn on MFA for everybody? Well, there's a couple of ways we can do that. 3, if we really want to be exact. Conditional access. This is first and foremost. This is the way everybody should be looking to do this today. And it's the best way to secure your entire organization. Not just one user, not just one device, but your entire organization. We're going to talk in the next couple of slides about what conditional access really is, how it works, and what it benefits. But trust me, it is the way you want to go, and we'll talk more about it. Security defaults. This is the older way of doing it. This is when we used to turn on MFA for everybody. Now, not necessarily a bad thing, but as you can see from the slide here, it generally is recommended for small business and some of your smaller environments. Not necessarily great for larger environments. And the reason for that is we have no control. It's just on or off, period. And there's no settings around it, meaning I can't tell how often you need to MFA in. I can't put any kind of session controls. It's just on or off, period. And it's on or off for the entire organization. You start getting into organizations that are true enterprise class, you want a little more control, right? So I may want to be able to say, I told you a lot of people are not in corporate offices anymore, but especially over the past year, we're starting to see more and more of that. People are moving back into corporate offices. So it's the ability to say, okay, if you're plugged into my network, that means you've already passed all of my security barriers, if you will. So I'm not going to make you MFA. But you take your exact same laptop and you go home, and I am going to make you MFA because I want to confirm who you are. We lose that ability with the security defaults, so we don't have as much control. And then last but not least, and this is very old school MFA, is that per user account. As you can see, that's got a big thumbs down. We don't like that one. And the reason for that is there's no control. I don't know who has it, who doesn't have it. Does my CEO have it? Yes, but my CIO doesn't. Does my VP? No, but my frontline worker does. So it doesn't give you the level of control we need. So again, we go back to that conditional access state because then we have the most granular control over when you do and don't. So let's talk about conditional access. As I said, it is a way to essentially look at your device as it comes in and then look at your identity as it comes in and provide that access based on each connection attempt. So we've talked for a long time. We want to know you are who you say you are, right? That's a common term you'll hear out there. Are you who you say you are? And that's great. And that's worked for a long time. And that's where you see in this upper left things like location and user-based conditional access. We look at things like, I happen to be from Michigan, Candy happens to be from Florida. So if I were to take my laptop right now and Candy were to try to log in with my account, we'll say 20 minutes from now, the system would flag it because she's trying to log in from Florida and I just logged in from Michigan 20 minutes ago. Impossible travel, you can't do it. That's great. You're not who you say you are. But as we move towards that zero trust architecture I spoke of, we need to take that a step further. We need to look at things like, is the device who it says it is? Are you really where you say you are? We look much, much bigger, and that's where conditional access starts to come in. We can do device-based conditional access. This is things like I talked about. If your device isn't compliant, meaning you don't have an antivirus, you don't have disk encryption, you don't have patch 123, whatever the case may be, we're not letting you in. We can also do things like this lower right corner, risk-based conditional access. This has been a huge development within Microsoft over the past year or so and has gotten a lot of attention. It's the heuristics around looking at things like I just talked about, impossible travel. More importantly, odd or non-distinct logins. So the ability to start looking at things like I typically work anywhere from 6 to 7 in the morning until probably 6 or 7 at night most days. I may be online anywhere in there. It's not very common for me to be online at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So if my device tries to log into my account at 3 a.m. in the morning, there's a pretty good chance something's not quite right. So it's starting to use machine learning and just general risk-based factors to do a more granular controlled method of blocking users. And then of course, that last one, we can now expand this out into application-based conditional access. So we can say things like you can access your Outlook email, but only if you're accessing it from a device that has Outlook, because we have a policy for that. If you don't, we're not going to let you access your email. You can't get to your email using the native Apple app on an iPhone, for instance. You can't get to it using, a Thunderbird or an old mail client. We can limit that access to control the data within any of our applications. This kind of sums that up. Like I said, this is just a much bigger picture of kind of that same concept. But as you can see, it's all built around that idea of policies, machine learning, and then a real-time evaluation engine. And that real-time evaluation engine is things like I talked about, where 3 a.m. is not a normal login time for you. Policies. We have specific policies that we put in place, right? You can't do this, you can do that, you have to have this patch. And then machine learning is largely Microsoft's bringing to the table, if you will. And a lot of this is built around that idea of, if you have an attack, you have a breach, or you have an attempted breach, Microsoft has probably already seen that 100 times because there are, I forget the latest numbers, but just over 1 million users in M365 today. It might actually be higher than that. But so everything that happens, they're seeing in massive scale. So you're also benefiting from the fact that while you may not have had an attempt, you may not have had a forced password or a brute force attack, 6 other people did. And Microsoft has course corrected for that and has addressed it. So you benefit from it. But as you can see here, it all ties into conditions, controls, and then your access. So the conditions are who you are, where you are, what your device is, things like that. Controls are what I want to put in place. I can allow or block access, or maybe I want to allow it, but I'm going to limit it. I'm not going to let you get to everything. I'm going to limit where you can go. I'm going to require MFA, or I'm not going to require MFA. Forced password reset. This is a great one I've seen used a lot lately when I talked about that impossible travel or unlikely logins. So again, 3 a.m. in the morning, my machine may pop up and say, hey, listen, you're good to go. But it is 3 a.m. and that's not like you. So I'm going to force you to reset your password. I just want to make sure you are who you say you are. And again, if I don't know my password, I can't reset it. And then block legacy authentication. This used to be a much bigger one. Most everything has moved away from legacy authentication, but we do still see it out there. Legacy authentication is scarily similar to plain text passwords. So, talked about MFA with conditional access. These two together give you the most secure connection and the most control over that connection. And this image here just kind of re-shows that, right? The signal is the user coming in. The verify every access attempt is what we're going to do. And then the apps and data we're trying to access. So let's talk about our third point. And that is, how do we protect the applications? And then how do we do it on the devices that our users want? Because that may not always be on our laptop. And it really comes down to a simple question: to enroll or not to enroll? It really is the question. If we use enrollment, something like this slide, this is moving into that MDM environment I talked about, where it's full device management. As you can see, it's still very close to zero touch. The users have to install the company portal and away they go. Or if it's a Windows 10 device, we can actually do it via work account, autopilot, any of the other options we have out there to make it truly zero touch. But once we get them into that company portal, which can be downloaded from any of the major stores, they simply sign in. It connects to Azure Active Directory, as you can see here in part A. Active Directory connects to Intune as part B, which then pushes all of those policies we talked about. And as an added bonus to that, now you have part C, which is they're now into our device management portal. And we can actually monitor what's going on, what applications have been pushed, what patches have been pushed, things like that. From an iOS perspective, this is what I was talking about. If you have a BYOD versus a corporate owned device, if you have BYOD, we have a couple of options. App managed, which we said does not involve enrollment. The beauty of application managed is there is no enrollment. You simply go download Outlook and add in your policy or your account and connect to it like you would from anywhere else. On the back end of that, we're actually protecting that application with conditional access versus user enrollment or iOS device managed. User enrollment is the company portal I talked about. iOS device managed, this is truly kind of flipping over into that corporate owned type of scenario. These might be your velocity programs, any of the like the DEP programs, the I forget the acronym that Apple uses off the cuff right now. But these are your devices you order pre-configured. On the Android side, we have similar, except Android apps. Sorry about that. Android enters in the work profile concept. So Android takes that one step further and allows people to have a work profile, which gives us the ability to truly segregate, whether it's MDM or MAM, that phone into two separate pieces, if you will. It's basically two separate containers on the same phone. Much more robust, much easier to control, and much more restrictive, right? So a user could very easily have two Outlook installations on one phone. One is their personal, one is their corporate. So there's some advantages and disadvantages. But again, these are all built around that idea of, do we enroll or do we not enroll? If we enroll, we get far more towards the right side of this. If we stay unenrolled, we get this first application protection policies. Again, I have no control over your phone. I simply have control over the application. And that's what this slide is really speaking to. You can see here that with an app protection without enrollment, and I put it in capitalization for a reason, it's without enrollment, we don't have any control over the device. We just have control over our data, which is largely on mobile phones, tablets, things like that, what we're really driving towards. We can allow customers to protect their data in managed apps, but prevents any intrusion into their personal life. So again, no control over the phone. I have no ability to make any bulk changes to your phone. On the MDM side, we still see that a lot on the laptop type of machines where I want full control of everything. It's my laptop, right? However, if you have a BYOD environment with laptops, this can still apply. Again, I don't care where you went and bought your laptop, but I am going to protect my data. So that's the difference between with and without enrollment. And it really does become the biggest question, right? So do you want to enroll or do you not want to enroll? Most end up in the middle somewhere. Some are enrolled, some are not. Laptops are, phones are not. Maybe it's a mix in the phones, but that's the biggest question. So as we've gone through this today, and I know we're about 2:45 here, so I'll give just a little bit of time in case there's some Q&A out there. But as I said in the beginning, something to remember is this is a very small overview of the full endpoint management workshop we can provide. And we can go far more into depth on all of these topics because this has just brushed the surface. We can talk about things like patching, device management, device retirement in depth, how you can report it, analytics, things like that. So I would encourage anybody that sees this to take a look at our next steps here, which is actually that endpoint management workshop. And I would highly recommend anybody who has any of those licenses we talked about today, is not using Intune, or maybe is using Intune for your mobile phones. That's the other one I run across a lot. We have Intune in place today, we're securing our phones with it, we're good to go. Actually, are you controlling your Windows devices with it? Well, no, we're not. Still a great conversation to have. So I would encourage anybody in those situations to reach out and we can talk through these. The other workshop we have that's worth mentioning is our next gen workshop. It's next generation endpoints. And now we talk more about things like the new Windows 365 and virtual environments. And again, that very, very updated and very segregated type of workforce and how we can control those. So hopefully this has been beneficial today. I appreciate your time joining in and listening today. And if you have any other questions, I will turn it back to Candy in case there were. And I will leave you with some additional content. And these are in the deck we're going to send out, but here's a couple of other things we do have out there around that. Demystifying Microsoft 365 licensing is the short video I talked about. And some other assessments we have out there and some other workshops we've done. So with that, Candy, do we happen to have any questions out there?
So Tyson, we had some issues with the chat feature today, but if anybody does have questions, please feel free to email us at marketing@coretech.com or visit the contact us page at coretech.com. We'll be happy to get your questions over to Tyson and set up a quick call or just reply with a great answer for you. But thank you so much, Tyson. This was very interesting and really helpful for everyone, I'm sure. We will be sending out the recording of this webinar as well as a copy of the deck for you to reference. And if you're interested in any of the workshops discussed on the webinar today, please reach out to coretech.com or just give us a call. Thank you, everybody. I hope you all have a great day.
Thanks, Candy.